Okay. While away, I followed the Loveless sentence reduction hearing on the internet and found out the judge was waiting to make a decision. Trying to pull out of this rest area in Virginia. Apparently, there were 7,000 signatures from the internet to keep her in prison, and I have to agree. She spent the first 16 years of her life with her deranged and abusive father, and the next 16 years in prison. What kind of social skills could she have? Still planning on stopping in Madison. Found some information on the internet when I was in North Carolina that I will check into tomorrow, hopefully. There's some cool mountains coming up. So now Virginia going into West Virginia. When planning my route home, I decided to enter Madison from the northeast, by way of Cincinnati. This way I would travel down Route 62, and part of the exact road that Lori Tackett and Melinda Loveless traveled with Shanda in the trunk. The area where they repeatedly stopped to beat her with a tire iron, and at one point sodomized her with that same tire iron. This road was somewhat treacherous at night, with deep wooded ravines, and spooky. The next day I drove out to Lemon Road and approached it from Route 62, the route the girls took when they left. From my research years ago, I knew where it was and found the exact spot with ease, where Shanda was burned. When I exited my auto to videotape, a cold wind was blowing tremendously. Nothing supernatural, just a higher elevation than Madison. When I left, I continued to backtrack and followed the same route as the girls that morning, down Camp Meeting Road. This is actually the road that the girls drove down to dump Shanda's body. It's beautiful out here. What an interesting ride they must have had that morning. Can you imagine that? I wonder if Shanda was moving around in the trunk of the car at this time. They're coming behind me. That night I called a local reporter who covered the story as it evolved. He was very talkative and informative, and he said he would call me back, but never did. The next morning I decided to go to Toni's parents' residence. The local reporter I spoke to the night before encouraged me to stop there, saying that Toni's father still lived there and he may be able to get me in touch with her. I had sent a letter to Toni to this exact address, hoping it would reach her, to inform her of my intentions. Before I left that morning, I logged onto the internet and found Toni's webpage. There was a picture of her, which would be helpful. When I knocked on the door and she answered, I recognized her immediately from the information I had just gathered on the internet. I introduced myself and stated my intentions and wanting to talk about the sociology aspects of this crime. She said no, shaking her head, something she does not want to think about. But this will never go away. She was not rude. She was very cordial, actually a very soft-spoken girl. Somewhat meek. Nothing like what I had been reading on the internet. Her little girl wiggled in between the door. Even though she shooed her away, my thoughts were that her little ears were listening. It definitely limited what I wanted to say. I did have the opportunity to stop at Toni's house. She answered the door. I spoke to her. She's not interested in talking about this at all. I truly wish my letter had arrived before I attempted to knock on her door. I mentioned it. She said she received no letter. Because it had the resume with the productions I produced and things like that. Here, I'm a complete stranger knocking on her door. I'm sure she's a bit paranoid. Had a little girl there. Couldn't see her, but her little girl came to the door as well. As I looked into her eyes, I wondered, was this the type of individual who would bite her own hand? Karma. If so, there is learned information she has that she could contribute to society. Something she needs to think about. Now that she's trying to move on with her life. It seems like there's more and more of a cult following to this. We have to remember that she did try to stop the beating of Shanda, but Melinda Lovelace, a girl she had just met, wielding a knife, started screaming at her. Toni just retreated to the car. Didn't throw me out. Kept the door partially opened, almost as if I said the right words, I might convince her to talk a little bit longer. She was also trying to figure me out. I could tell that. But what threw me off was her eyes. She had these contacts in, a deep blue contact that didn't completely surround the iris of her eyes. So she had a ring of brown. I couldn't figure out if it was a mistake or if it's kind of like an image, maybe a protection wall she's built up around herself, you know. It gives her a different look. It's hard to look in her eyes with that ring there. It throws you off, throws off your concentration right away, man.